everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a topic that is just incredibly relevant to all of us right now: the modern government's creeping reach into our everyday lives. In this explainer, we're going to unpack a really fascinating analysis by public administration expert Paul Frissen. He takes a hard look at the overreaching and, he argues, inherently dangerous nature of the modern state. We'll be looking at how well-intentioned technocracy, fiery populism, and this overall loss of political neutrality are fundamentally reshaping how free we actually are.
So ask yourself a really simple question. Is the state behind your front door? We usually think of the government as something out there, right? Building roads, managing foreign policy, collecting taxes. But how deeply is the government actually managing your private everyday life? Your habits, your values, your health? Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Meddling State. To see how the state slowly encroaches on personal autonomy, let's look at an everyday example: the Dutch Schrijf 5, their national food guidelines. Now, on the surface, it's framed purely as a matter of health and safety, but if you look closer, it actually prescribes diets down to the exact gram. It dictates a very specific, almost clinical way of eating, and it intentionally leaves out deeply cultural things like wine and coffee. Frissen points out that this seemingly innocent public health initiative is actually acting as a moralizing tool. It basically turns into a civilizing offensive pushed by an elite who believe they know the absolute best way for you to live your life. This kind of dietary micromanagement is a perfect real-world example of what the French political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville called mild despotism. It's a really interesting concept. It describes a situation where a state is acting with the absolute best intentions for its citizens' well-being, but by doing so, it slowly enforces this silent discipline and normalization. It's creeping control. It starts with diet advice, and before you know it, it can easily slip into something like adjusting your health insurance premiums based on your weight or your personal habits. Chapter 2, The Danger of Technocracy. As we zoom out from mundane things like dietary advice to a broader, systemic view, we start to realize that state power, no matter how scientific or rational it claims to be, is fundamentally coercive. Paul Frissen puts the reality of this danger pretty starkly. He says, the state is allowed to use violence and steal from us. Now, I know that sounds shocking, but it's a technical reality. The state holds a legal monopoly on the use of force, and it has the power of taxation. So, the absolute crucial point here is that when an institution with this level of raw power tries to enforce a specific morality or a correct way to live, it becomes highly dangerous. Frissen uses this fantastic metaphor to explain this. He compares customization between a tailor and the state. Think about it. If you go to a tailor for a custom suit, it's completely voluntary. They work within your budget, and you tell them exactly what you want. But when the state promises customization, which politicians often call the human scale, it's an entirely different beast. Because for the state to customize its services to you individually, it demands total knowledge of your life. It requires absolute submission and intense surveillance of your personal data. And this brings us to a devastating real-world consequence: the Dutch childcare benefits scandal, or the Toeslagen affair, where thousands of totally innocent families were financially ruined by the tax authority. Frissen maps this out as a technocratic pipeline to disaster. It started with a perfectly rational desire for strict fraud prevention. Well, that desire led to a massive data collection effort on everyday citizens, which logically paved the way for using algorithms for statistical profiling. And the inevitable endpoint? Institutional disaster and discrimination. The tragic reality we have to face is that this wasn't just some glitch in the matrix. It was the logical, destructive result of a well-intentioned, highly efficient technocratic state. Chapter 3, The Battle for the State. Now, because this state apparatus is just so incredibly powerful, it basically becomes the ultimate prize. Both ends of the political spectrum are constantly attempting to hijack it to enforce their own worldview. On the technocratic left, their claim to power is often based on reason and science. On the populist right, it's based on the will of the people. But notice what they have in common: their shared tactics. Both sides use a sense of apocalyptic urgency to justify their actions. For the left, it's the climate. For the right, it's demographics. And both use this intense urgency to argue that, hey, we simply don't have time for normal, slow parliamentary debate. Frissen neutrally points out examples from both sides here: climate activists demanding immediate action that bypasses democracy, and populist leaders dismissing the legislature as a fake parliament. And this leads to a pretty fascinating irony. Frissen points out that modern Western technocracy, with all its strict conditions regarding diversity, lifestyle, and progressive values, is actually, ironically, the mirror image of Viktor Orban's illiberal state in Hungary. both systems use the tremendous power of the state to dictate what they consider to be the good life. They just happen to have totally different definitions of what that life is. Chapter 4. Migration as a Political Choice. Migration serves as the absolute ultimate test case for this problem. It's the one issue where the technocratic desire for a perfectly objective, cleanly managed solution just completely breaks down. I mean, you'll often hear politicians promise to get a grip on migration. It sounds great, doesn't it? Very professional. But Frissen points out that this is a purposefully vague political compromise. Politicians use words like grip because they want to sound like they're just managing a logistical problem, rather than making hard, fundamentally subjective choices about who is actually allowed to belong to the community. So why exactly does technocracy fail here? Well, simply put, technocracy demands a single, fair, or rational answer to every single problem. But as Frissen argues, if you truly want to be perfectly universally fair in migration, the only logical conclusion is open borders, because technically the land doesn't belong to anyone more than anyone else. But a nation-state is a political community, and defining who belongs to it is an inherently subjective, arbitrary choice. So at the end of the day, migration isn't a puzzle to be solved by management and algorithms. It requires open and, yes, sometimes harsh, political and moral debate. Chapter 5. Return to the neutral state. So, considering all of this, how do we find our way out of this massive polarization and state overreach? Well, Frissen's philosophical solution is something he calls conservative pluralism. And this is a really vital concept to understand. It essentially means the state's primary job is to protect the radical differences among its citizens. And this crucially includes the fundamental right to not be liberal. True freedom means the state actively protects your right to hold a worldview completely different from the elite consensus. The goal is to ensure that deeply diverse communities can coexist peacefully without the state constantly moralizing at them. To actually achieve this in practice, we need fewer state conditions and a lot more societal trust. Frissen suggests that if we return responsibilities, things like social security, healthcare, and education, back to societal organizations and local communities, and we do it with far fewer bureaucratic rules and conditions attached, we could actually revive this pluralism. Basically, let society be varied, messy, and different, rather than trying to force everyone into one single state-approved mold. Now, I should point out that this deep analysis isn't just some fleeting thought he had. This is actually the culmination of Paul Frissen's 5 major academic books. He spent years charting the evolution, the hubris, and the real dangers of the modern state. It's literally a lifetime of studying how power actually operates behind the scenes. Which leaves us with an incredibly provocative, defining question for our time. Should the state determine what the good life is, or is that choice entirely up to you? Where exactly is the boundary between a state that protects us and a state that controls us? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this analysis has given you a powerful new lens through which to view the news, the government, and of course your own front door. Until next time.